good afternoon. We appreciate you taking the time to join us. I'm Michael Johnson. I'm a member of the Inform's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee and chair of the Research Pathways Subcommittee that's responsible for today's webinar on expanding the field. So we've organized two earlier webinars this year. The first was on DEI and research and teaching, the impact of anti-DEI laws on teaching and scholarship. That was on July 25th. And DEI and scholarly publications. That was on August 29th. And the co-organizer for today's event is Dr. Grani Hanasusanto. He's a fellow DEIC member and associate professor of industrial and enterprise systems engineering at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Grani, thanks so much for helping to organize this. So as you might have seen, we're recording this webinar and we'll post it on YouTube on the Informs channel in a few days. We'll put the link to the first two webinars in the chat. Grani, can you do that? So the first link is to the YouTube video on impact of DEI laws. And the second link that Grani will put in the chat is the one for the webinar on DEI and scholarly publications. So today's webinar on the topic of building the field will enable three distinguished scholars in OR analytics who I'll introduce with the opportunity to share their thoughts on how to attract more people to OR analytics research devoted to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and racial and social justice. Our panelists will address challenges associated with balancing needs for research as distinct from service and teaching, solving problems using traditional analytic methods, as well as community-engaged and participatory approaches, choosing research outlets associated with scholarly as well as practice-focused impacts, ensuring meaningful participation by members of traditionally underrepresented groups, and addressing concerns especially relevant to early career researchers. Our agenda consists of the panelist introduction, opening statements by each of them, a panel discussion, which I'll moderate, audience Q&A, and the closing. So we welcome any questions or comments in the chat. We'll do our best to address them during the webinar. And if we don't have time, we'll try and follow up afterwards. And during the audience Q&A, we'll recognize raised hands as well. So I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists. The full biographies are available on the event description page. And Grani, you're welcome to put the link to the event description page in the chat. So our first panelist is Dr. Karen.hicklin. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Population Health Science and Policy with affiliations in the Center for Biostatistics, the Tisch Cancer Institute, and the Blavatnik Family Women's Health Research Institute at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. Have I got that right? Karen received her PhD from the Edward P. Fitz Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering at North Carolina State University and completed her postdoctoral training in the Department of Health Behavior and Department of Statistics and Operations Research at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Her research interests include data-driven approaches to model decision-making for improved healthcare quality and delivery with applications in women's health, cancer care, and health disparities. Karen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Next we have Larry Snyder. He's the Harvey E. Wagner Professor of Industrial and Systems Engineering and the Deputy Provost for Faculty Affairs at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, PA. Larry received his PhD in Industrial Engineering and Management Sciences from Northwestern University. He finished sometime after me. His research interests include the application of optimization tools to problems in supply chains and energy systems, and more recently, the relationship between optimization and social justice. He teaches an interdisciplinary course at Lehigh called Algorithms and Social Justice, which is cross-listed between ISE, his home department, and Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. Larry, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And last, we have Dr. Phoebe Vianos. She holds an Andrew and Erna Viterbi Early Career Chair in Engineering at the University of at the University of Southern California, where she is an associate professor of industrial and systems engineering and computer science, and she co-directs the Center for Artificial Intelligence in Society. Her research aims to advance integer, stochastic, and robust optimization, and their interface with machine learning, causal inference, and economics to enable the design of predictive and prescriptive models that are suitable to deploy in high-stakes settings. She aims to directly apply the methods and tools she creates in her work to make a positive impact on society, and in particular to support underserved and marginalized communities. Phoebe holds a PhD degree in operations research and a Master of Engineering degree in electrical and electronic engineering, both from Imperial College, London. Phoebe, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
And Anahita, I see that you're here. Great, thanks, Anahita. So we'll turn it over to Anahita Kojandi, Chair of the Informs DEI Committee, and she'll tell us a bit about the committee's mission, goals, and recent activities. Anahita.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Michael and Granny, for organizing this webinar. It's really a big help to the community and really a big endeavor. Appreciate that. And thanks to our panelists for making time and sharing their thoughts and insights with us. So I'm Anahita Kojandi. I'm an associate professor of industrial and systems engineering, and I have the pleasure of chairing the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for Informs. And our mission is to promote DEI in everything we do. And the committee is rather large, and it organizes itself into 5 subcommittees, focusing on various aspects that touch the lives of our members, from research to teaching to making sure that our industry members are also feel welcome and we can cater to their needs as they relate to DEI. This webinar, as Michael mentioned, is part of our research activities. We do have teaching activities, industry focused. We organize a lot of sessions at the annual meeting. Hopefully you're going to be there and you're going to participate and benefit from those. We also have different activities that are essentially driven by our members, by Informs members. So Ambassador Program is one of the activities where we invest in our members, invest the vision of our members to help close the gaps that they find within their community, within their immediate circle. And some of them grow to become an integral part of Informs, and we have seen that over the years. The call for proposal is actually going to be open soon, so I encourage you to think about that and apply if you have the bandwidth to go after some of these projects. So we try to be a platform, essentially, at DEIC. We try to be a platform for engaging with the community and promoting DEI. Doesn't necessarily mean that all of us are experts in DEI. We just try to be there and kind of connect and make that network happen. So, Michael, hopefully this captures a little bit about what the DEIC tries to do and hopefully how it relates to the activities that you are leading in this webinar.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anita. And Granny has put in the chat a link to the homepage for the Diversity Committee. And that should include connections to our different activities. So thank you very much, Anahita. And as someone who's been involved with the DEIC from the beginning, I want to welcome all who are here to consider joining the DEIC, to becoming a part of the Informs Connect DEI community, and to participate in all of our different activities, including putting in for the Diversity Ambassadors Seed Grant Awards, which we do every year, among many others. So thank you very much, Anahita. I'd like to move now to opening statements by our three panelists. And what we hope to do is to have them discuss any aspect of their experiences getting started in DEI and racial and social justice informed work in OR analytics that seem relevant to this gathering. And they may address topics like how they got started, how they transitioned from their original research agenda, how they've identified collaborators, how they see deepening and diversifying the field, and the impact on scholarship and practice that they anticipate their research could have. So if I may invite Phoebe, then Karen, then Larry to share some thoughts. Phoebe?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. So yeah, let me start by saying a little bit how I got involved in this kind of problems. So my background is in very much methodological research. So my PhD was on sequential decision-making under uncertainty, robust optimization, modeling, algorithms, all that good stuff. And I really love it. On the other hand, while I liked the challenge of solving these kind of problems, it did not fulfill me 100%, and I was looking for something more to do. At the same time, looking at what applications I could see around me, most of them at the time that at least I was exposed to related to, supply chains, like the usual stuff we see in OR, like pricing, and it's interesting, but again, it didn't give me that something more that I was looking for in my research. And I guess the switching point for me was when I moved to LA and saw the situation with homelessness. And, I hadn't, coming from Europe, I had not seen anything like that before. And I thought perhaps this is something where I could help, but again, I didn't exactly know how to do it. So I was very fortunate to meet a professor in the School of Social Work at USC. He was actually introduced to me to Milind Tambe, who was a very good mentor and influential force, at least in terms of how to think about interdisciplinary collaborations. And so I was introduced to Eric Rice by him, who is a professor in the School of Social Work, who's focused on homelessness. And at the time, Eric was had a data set that he was trying to figure out what to do with it, which basically was looking at individuals experiencing homelessness and trying to see, well, can we use that data set to evaluate who is most vulnerable and how to prioritize them for resources? And kind of with my OR mindset, I thought, well, actually, we may be able to do more with this data set. Perhaps we can actually help design better policies. Perhaps we can do more than just predicting vulnerability, but actually do decision making. And so I think, this was really the switching point for me of really, oh, you know what? I can actually use the skills we have been trained in to solve problems that perhaps others have not thought about before, or that at least I had not thought about solving using our tools before. And as it turns out, so with Eric, we started talking with policymakers in LA. We have many joint projects together over the years, learning to speak one another's language, identifying new research questions. And as it turns out, there's some rich set of research questions in our field that need to be addressed in order to help address the social issues faced by those like more marginalized and underserved groups. And this is what excites me most, like the feeling that I'm doing something to help, and at the same time, these like methodological aspects of needing to advance our knowledge in our fields to tackle these pressing issues. I'll close off. I think the end of your question related to how I identified collaborators. So it started with Eric. Since then, we built the Center for AI in Society at USC, which brings together researchers across the university from, in particular, engineering and social work. And this has been a very fruitful way of identifying new problems to work on in both fields, but then also of attracting partners, community partners that actually have genuine problems they're interested in solving and in using the techniques that we are best at to help them address. Yeah.
Awesome.
You are muted, Michael.
Yes, so thank you very much. I appreciate all of your perspectives. I'd like to turn it now to Karen.
Okay, sure. So for me, a lot of what I am doing now is probably driven from origins of my lived experience as a Black woman. And I think a lot of what I'm passionate about is kind of driven from that, and just knowing how a lot of conditions, and I'm speaking more so from the health disparities aspect and the health component of the DEI space, and really thinking about how there are a lot of vulnerable communities of color that have really bad health outcomes. And thinking about this from a historical perspective comes from not necessarily having all of the resources available to you or being in impoverished areas, things of that nature. A lot of this is what we've seen over the years come to light, not necessarily that it's new, it's been around for many, many years, but now we see it more coming to light, and there's a lot of spotlight on certain conditions, and there's a lot more awareness. So I think that's where I get a lot of my motivation from. Just to give you a little bit more background about me, I grew up in Washington, D.C. I went to college in Atlanta, Georgia at Spelman College. So I got a lot of my training of what I could do as a scholar there. And that kind of helped me to see that I wanted to do a little bit more with research. So I got from there, went to Georgetown for a master's, and then from there went to NC State for my PhD. And in my dissertation work, it was really focused on decision-making under uncertainty, still related to healthcare, women's health in particular, thinking about the C-section decision while women are in labor, and how do you decide when a C-section is needed. And I think that was something that I didn't necessarily know was possible, is working in healthcare and being able to apply some of these mathematical techniques to healthcare. So that was really, that kind of combined my heart and my mind. And in my heart, I knew that I wanted to do something that made a difference. And I feel like being in the healthcare space and being able to provide a lens on better decision-making in that space was something that fulfilled that need. And I think it also helped with the fact that I enjoyed math and being able to apply probability in these spaces. I think that was also the head part. So the heart and the head kind of met there. But I think I've gotten more into health disparities when I was able to do my postdoc in the School of Public Health at UNC, because there I developed a different lens on what it means to actually do healthcare research. I think coming from engineering, doing healthcare research, you have some sense of what's happening in the community, you have some sense of what's happening in medicine, but when you're actually immersed in the population health department and policy, you see it from a different lens. You actually know that the things that you're working on really can touch people. And that's when I was more exposed to health disparities. I actually was a part of a cancer health disparities program in my postdoc, which allowed me to see that there are different circumstances that people go through in cancer treatment, from screening all the way to survivorship, where there are disparities along the way. And so I was really exposed to this from different lenses, and it helped me to see that I can be a part of the solution by being able to offer some of the expertise that I do have in decision-making or simulation modeling, or just evaluating different interventions that can really be impactful. So for me, that's where a lot of my research interest was developed around health disparities. I think health disparities has a natural home in the DEI space because it gets at the differences that we see in healthcare that involves the equity piece. The diversity element is the fact that typically different communities have different outcomes. So we're looking at different types of communities and trying to figure out how to best serve the different communities. An inclusion component of it is just being able to know that there are communities that are vulnerable or underserved and can be included, because everyone deserves a good chance at healthcare. So I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation and hopefully being able to just provide a little bit more about my story and what drives me, and hopefully encouraging others to be a part of this as well.
Thank you very much, Karen. Thanks for sharing your story with us. Now we'd like to bring Larry in.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you to everyone who's here. So my experience with equity and justice related aspects of OR or computing more broadly really is mostly in the teaching arena. So let me start there. So I currently co-teach a class at Lehigh called Algorithms in Social Justice, which I created along with my co-teacher. So the co-instructor is my spouse, who's a faculty member also at Lehigh, and she teaches in the English department and the WGSS program, which is Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. So she's an expert in things like feminist theory and critical race theory and queer theory. And we developed this course as a way of trying to introduce technologists, engineers, computer scientists, OR folks to ideas in the humanities much earlier than they are typically introduced in a typical like tech development project, let's say. And also to introduce humanists and social scientists to ideas from engineering so that that's on their radar, you know, in the ways that they think about society. So that in our class, we talk about the ways that technology interacts with society. The kinds of things that we talk about in class are mostly from the computer science literature. So if you're familiar with any of the scholarship or even lots of news articles about bias in search algorithms or bias or facial recognition or predictive policing software, things like that. If you've read authors like Sophia Noble or Ruha Benjamin or Meredith Broussard, that's the kind of literature that we're talking about in that class. And we designed the class to be interdisciplinary. So half of the students are from humanities and social science, half of the students are from engineering. In a given class period, they will be reading feminist theory, and they'll also be writing Python code. And that's new for at least half the class, each of those things. And so we're trying to, there's the sort of peer-to-peer model so that the students are working with each other to help each other through the things that are harder for them. But really part of the idea of the class is to push everyone out of their comfort zone a little bit, including me and my co-teacher. And, one of the things that I've learned in teaching that class is that the computer science community has made a lot of progress in the last 10 years, let's say, at looking critically at their own tools, their own products, and examining the ways that those tools and products interact with society, and trying to be frank and open and clear-eyed about the ways that those tools often harm society or harm vulnerable groups within society. And so the piece that I want to try to bring up as more specific to OR is that I think OR has not really done quite enough of that yet. I think there are ways that operations research models have impacts in society that are not the impacts that we want, and that we could stand to take a closer look at some of those. And not even just the harms that might come out of OR models, but just thinking in a more holistic and interdisciplinary way about how OR models interact with society. I'll just bring up two examples real quick. One is that, employee scheduling is a classic example of an OR model, but there's literature showing that the employees who are affected by those models are often affected in very negative ways. I mean, the scheduling models schedule the bejesus out of their schedules so that people are working a late shift one night and an early shift the next morning. And that's because that's what's most efficient for the fast food restaurant, let's say, but it's not a good situation for the employees. And that piece of it, the way that that algorithmic tool interacts with society, is something that as OR folks, we tend to want to say, we build the models and you can do what you want with them. You can calibrate the objective function and set the weights the way you want. If you want to build in more time in between shifts, that's fine. You can just add that as a constraint in the model, no problem. And I think sometimes sort of let ourselves off the hook a little bit because we think of ourselves as generating these models that are neutral or objective. But what's come out of a lot of the research in computer science is the understanding that really no model is neutral or objective. Every model, every data set, every algorithm is the product of human decisions. And so it reflects human bias in various ways. Those ways aren't always problematic. They don't always lead to harms, but interrogating some of those biases and the ways that they manifest in the final products is something that I think OR could stand to do a bit more of. So I think I'll leave it there for now and look forward to questions.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks very much. I have questions for all three of our panelists, but I think inspired by how you introduce them yourselves, but I'd like to ask a question for the three of you that is related pretty closely to the motivation for this event in the first place. And that is that we may know of colleagues and of students who are interested in this space of diversity, equity, inclusion, racial and social justice infused or inspired work in analytics, but they may not be sure how to get started. They may have mastered the foundational material that may not have made clear connections to this space. And they may be searching for an entry point, how they can move from what they know really well to this space that may offer many opportunities for them, but represents some uncertainty as well. So I would welcome any of you if you could share some perspectives on how to help people who want to do the work to get started.
Sure, I can start, Michael. I think the best way to get started is to find a collaborator, find a partner, find either a community partner, or it can be another researcher in another field that has an actual problem they're passionate about solving, and they'll be happy to spend time with you to tell you about their problem, and they'll be happy to hear about your proposed solutions, discuss drawbacks, discuss data, discuss get into the weeds basically. The ideal scenario is to also have a community partner that would be interested in deploying this solution. This is, I think, what has worked for me, and that I think is the most promising way. Is it easy? No, it's hard and it takes time. It takes time to learn to speak the same language. It takes time to be able to share what we can do and how our methods can help. Even the basic things of, what is our objective here? For us, it's very clear what we mean, but defining it for a specific domain is hard. Understanding what the constraints are hard. Understanding the limitations of the data, biases, like Larry was saying, of the data, all this takes time, but it's worth it. Such research, that what is often called use-inspired research, where you start from the problem, do the research in our field, and then think about, how do I go back and deploy it actually? So this end-to-end research approach is really tough, but it's amazing because you get to see in practice how your models are making an impact, and you're learning so much at the same time.
Thank you, Phoebe. Do our other panelists have anything to add?
I think what I was going to say is very similar. It just starts with a conversation. I think showing up to spaces like this is also helpful to kind of build the network. I think also just within Informs, there are different opportunities to speak to different people who are already in this space. And I think that's a natural way that you can get involved. I think, as Phoebe mentioned, just kind of being more aware of what's happening in the community, maybe some common problems, some issues or concerns that have been expressed, and being able to say, well, I have a thought around that. and going to the people who are actually working on that, I think is a useful way. I think there's also an element of being respectful of this space, because I think there are a lot of sensitive topics, and because a lot of the solutions that we may provide really touch human lives, I think we have to definitely approach it with a sense of ethics and respect. And so I think that's also a part of it. And that's a part of just having the conversation with people who are already in the space, and they can kind of, I guess, guide you in some ways. But I think it's as natural as other ways of getting into a new topic. You kind of research that topic and you go talk to people who have already published in that area, who are doing things that you are interested in, and you try to see if there's some ways of collaborating and kind of growing a little bit more. There's so much information out there as well. I would say that's also a good start, is just kind of learning the language, as Phoebe mentioned as well. It's a different language sometimes depending on who your collaborators are, and you want to make sure to some extent that you're speaking the same language. So.
Thanks. I'd like to follow
For
up.
me,
Oh, Larry, please.
sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Please. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
for me, there's a kind of hard question and an easy question that are implied by your question, Michael. I mean, the kind of research that I'm wishing could be done more is really hard to do, in part because it's extremely interdisciplinary. In the computer science community, that kind of research is being done by computer scientists and sociologists and feminist theorists and journalists and historians, and it's really hard to form those kinds of connections. I haven't been able to do it, and you know, I hope others can. So I definitely don't have an answer to how to get started in that kind of research. But I do have an answer to the easy question, I think, which is just what books to read, because there are books that start to get at some of the, you know, that we've learned a lot from as we've prepared our class. For example, I'm going to drop a couple books in the chat here. These books are all very, very readable, even for non-technical folks, for non-experts. They're not about OR at all, but they're all kind of OR adjacent. They're about data or algorithms. And I really recommend them highly for students or anyone who wants to just start learning about the ways that people are thinking about algorithms and society.
Thank you, Larry. And I have a follow-up for all three of you. So I appreciate the book titles and authors that Larry put in the chat. Do Phoebe and Karen have any resources that are meaningful to them that people in our audience could engage with? They could be other books or reports or TED Talks. Things that could help people get some basic knowledge about this space.
Not offhand, but I can follow up.
Okay. I
recommend Larry Weapons of Mass Destruction book that Larry put up there. It's an easy read. It's very interesting. It touches on a lot of the issues that you encounter in practice when working with data that affects marginalized and vulnerable populations, even if it's not directly about that. So yeah, I strongly recommend it.
And I'll just add, if I can, that data feminism book also really talks about exactly what Phoebe, what you and Karen have been talking about, the importance of like working with community groups in mutually respectful ways, in ways that are egalitarian and so on. And they're really describing things that are smallish projects that are not very different from the kind of thing that OR folks usually do, which is we try to like scale everything up real big and automate everything. So I really like that book for that reason too.
Automating inequality is also very interesting. I'm, glancing at my bookshelf and seeing there what stands out that could be relevant here. This is by Virginia Eubanks.
Thank you. And yet another follow-up is this, that some of us may not have personal contacts with community-facing or community engaged organizations that do the work. And I'm wondering if any of you have examples from your own experience of a particular organization that you have found really useful in helping orient you or colleagues to the problem, or connecting you with practitioners, advocates, or community members.
I can jump in. So yeah, as I mentioned in my introduction, for me, having the Center for AI in Society, which is joined between social work and engineering, helps really attract new partners that are interested in solving similar kinds of problems. So I think having such an organization, whether it's in the form of a center or, you know, less official, like in the form of a group of collaborators that have, you know, done together a lot of research in these areas, is very helpful to attract new partners, but also kind of identify new problems that otherwise we wouldn't have come across somehow. For example, you know, yes, with Eric, we started working on homelessness, but then I started talking with another colleague in social work about issues related to substance use. And it's like, well, you know, a lot of the same issues come up, you know, is there, how could we help there? And if we're talking about suicide prevention, what could we do in that domain? So I think having a group of people from, you know, interdisciplinary researchers, basically, so from different domains, come together often, even if it's in a less formal setting than the center, I think could help a lot. Like even when we do an informal meetup with colleagues in social work, oftentimes we start talking, oh, you know, what are you working about? Oh, you know, this is something maybe I can help. And so, you know, something that starts with an informal conversation, a few years later can, you know, materialize into something bigger.
Thank you very much. So as you all were talking, I have examples of organizations that I know of in Boston that may have counterparts in the places where you live, who can provide entrees to community-facing organizations. So one of them is called the Mel King Institute for Community Building. It's in Boston. It's kind of like an umbrella organization for community-focused nonprofits who do community organizing, community development of different kinds. And they are an example of an organization who you could reach out to and say, I'm looking for partners. I have these problems to solve, and they could connect you with organizations. And another one that I'll put in the chat is Pro Bono Analytics. That's an Informs initiative that's been around for a while that connects analytics professionals with community-facing organizations that need consulting work. And as a member of Pro Bono Analytics, I can say that we have a really deep list of community-based organizations who may share your interests and have problems that you're interested in addressing. So I'd like to now ask this question.
Michael?
Yes, please.
Something that occurs to me as you're posting this is, personally, I find it hard to go myself in a new organization, in a domain I haven't worked on before, and say, hey, you know, here I am with my OR tools and I can help. I don't think I am credible, and I am not. And I don't think they would find me credible. So I think it's important to work with people who actually know the problem and are credible in that domain, and can teach us about the domain. I think it's hard if the community organization is doing the hard work of teaching us the stuff. I think they just don't have the resources, they don't have the time, or it's a luxury to do that. So for me, you know, it's great, those pointers, and I'm sure they can be helpful, but perhaps the engagement needs to be done together with someone who knows about the problems in those areas.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. I'd like to ask a slightly different question, and that is for those of us in research-intensive careers or in research-intensive organizations who have career considerations. Is there advice you can give to those of us who feel we must balance imperatives for certain kinds of external fundraising or certain kinds of scholarly publishing with our desire, as Karen said earlier, to combine heart and mind and to do work that makes a difference?
Yeah, I guess I can go first, because I will say that a lot of the work that I have done so far is in the space of healthcare, and I think that kind of newly getting into more of the health disparities work, I know that it's possible to combine the things that you're passionate about, as long as we kind of stick to the rigor that is assumed that we will be able to publish. And I think that's where this question is going. I think that's a beautiful thing when you can combine some of your personal passions with your professional goals. And when that comes together to be able to produce, I think that's a perfect space to be. So I don't think it's anything wrong with having and I think in a way you're kind of seen as someone who will be able to forge a new path in a way, because we take, in our research areas anyway, we're trying to figure out what is something new, what can we contribute? So if it hasn't been used or if it hasn't been done before, then I think that's a benefit, and that's a contribution that we're making to the science and to society. So I think there's a natural fit there, to be able to combine some of the things that you may have passions about, and things that are personally relevant to you, to be able to work on that thing and show that you can use some of your technical skills or your methods or even teaching in the classroom to bring that aspect to the classroom. I think is beneficial to students to be able to see as well.
Thank you, Karen.
If I can just piggyback on that last point, Karen. I mean, I think I think it's definitely possible to do, you know, tenure-worthy research in the area of OR and DEI or justice, but it is riskier. I mean, just because that path has not been blazed nearly as much as the path that, you know, I think that we all followed when we got tenure. There's a model for it. I mean, I think in computer science, some of the work that I'm reading and teaching about is published in amazing places. It gets a ton of press. I mean, there is a model for really impactful research in this area, but it's riskier. But I think if that's your interest, as Karen was saying, it doesn't, even if it doesn't become your major research interest, it can still be something you talk about in your classes, whether it's an intro to OR class or a class that's solely devoted to OR and DEI work or something like that, as well as in your service. So I think there's lots of ways that this can be part of someone's career, even if it feels too risky to make it the sole or main focus of your research portfolio.
Thank you, Larry. Any other
I can add
Yes.
to what Karen and Larry have said, with which I agree, by the way. So yeah, I only got tenure very recently. Larry, you said, yeah, that's the path you followed. I don't know that that's the path I followed. I repeatedly was told what you're doing is not research. Like, is it that what you're doing is not publishable? For me, that's an issue. I believe that doing DI research is worthy research, whether it's a direct application of tools that we know to a new domain, or whether it's like the use-inspired research I was talking about before. I think that it is up to, I guess, now us, the more senior people, to elevate this kind of work, to create potentially new venues, much like they have done in computer science, like Larry was mentioning, where this kind of work can be published. Maybe we need more of these. And Larry's absolutely right. If you go to a CS conference, in, for example, AIS conference, which is on ethics and society, you will find a reporter in almost every room there. And, they believe this is worthy research and it's exciting and it's interesting and we should have more of that. And so, yes, so senior researchers, it's our job to create more places like this where this work will be well received. If you're a junior researcher, it took me a while to figure out how to do this. I can tell you where I've converged. It was not an errorless path. I made many mistakes. Where I've converged is that, I think that a lot of the questions we encounter when doing DEI-focused research gives rise to very exciting research questions in OR. And this can be published in standard, like top-notch outlets like management science, operations research, and whatnot. And then, the application side can go perhaps to the main journal to create the impact it needs. So this is what I'm trying to do. On the other hand, where was I going? I lost a little bit track now. I think, yes, that we should create venues that are kind of where you can publish both aspects together, and where simple application to a new domain would have value and be appreciated.
Yeah, thank you, Phoebe. And so this, what you're talking about, the question of appropriate venues and outlets for our work, reminds me of a connection to the previous webinar we did in this series on scholarly publications, and I encourage you to check it out. We had the VP of publications give some suggestions on how we can change the nature of the expectations in our field, including special issues of journals, topics that are relevant to us. Mm-hmm. I'd like now, if we could, to open it up to our audience. You've been so patient listening to us speak, and I'd like to encourage anyone, if you have a question, to please share it with our panelists. So any questions from our audience? Okay, hearing none, I'd like to, anyone have their hands raised?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Hello, Michael. Thank you very much for your invitation and for your great session. I would like to ask the audience if you are working in, similar topics, but we would like to know whether the hot research questions or problems that are appreciated, how we can learn more. Because I saw, for example, Phoebe raised a couple of research interests, which is exactly my research directions, bringing, for example, causal inference into machine learning, or, how to perform trade-off between interpretability and, accuracy, how we can apply these methods, which to me, there are still a lot of weakness, a lot of issues with them, to the real world problems, particularly complicated, very complicated, complex, problems like EDI problems, equality, or energy, poverty, similar problems, how we can do that.
Phoebe, any response?
I'm not sure I'm 100% clear on the question, Hamid. So you're asking you're saying that because there are limitations in those methods, it's not clear that it's okay to apply them. Is that the question, or is the question? Yeah, I'm not entirely sure I understand.
That's fine. It's my question was a little bit, maybe a couple of questions embedded in one
Okay.
question. Yes, the first
Mhm.
question is how we know how I could learn what are the
Mhm.
main important hot research questions
I see.
in this
Mhm.
domain.
I
Second
see.
question, how we can implement them, because as you know, I just know very basic about interpretable ML. I'm moving towards causal inference, ML. But to be honest with you, ML, they have a lot of limitations.
Yeah,
That's why practitioners don't want us.
Good.
How we
Yeah.
can how we can employ them in a most possible practical way.
Yeah. I mean, you're raising the question I'm faced with all the time. It's like, oh my, this is a problem. Oh my, this is a problem. This is a problem. How do I choose what to first work on? Like, I would need, like, the many more students, 3 times my smarts, and so it's. I think it's precisely you're putting, your finger on exactly the issues, like doing actually this research right, like having a positive impact on society, mitigating biases, helping those most in need is really, really, really hard. Like there's genuinely difficult research questions in OR that needs to be addressed for us to be able to do this right. Do I believe that it means we cannot help? No. I think that already, even with the tools we have, we can move the needle. But the more of these issues we can address, the more and more we'll be able to help. And how to prioritize, it's a hard question. I don't really have a good answer for it. The way I go about it is, let's do the simple thing, the easy thing. Does that work? Does that help? Then, okay, I understand there is this issue that in my model I didn't account for. Is it important? Does it matter? If so, how do I address it? And like step by step, like this, is it an entirely satisfactory answer? No. And, for me, I think the most difficult in doing this kind of research is that I wish I could help faster. Research takes time, at least it takes me time. And keeping up with the pace of organizations and with the needs of the community, it's difficult. And so, these prioritization issues are there all the time. So I'm sorry I don't have a good answer, but maybe it helped a
No,
little
that's
bit.
fine. I know that it's not an easy question. I don't expect,
Yeah.
quick answer to that. But it's good to think about that. Maybe you could share your experience, so which should help me. And by the way, I'm based in the UK, so we are all the time talking about impacts, but a lot of times I'm facing the similar questions, how we can employ ML models, algorithms to impact.
Thank you, Hamid and Phoebe. I have a request for the panel. This is not something that we scripted or discussed, but I'm wondering if it might be possible that if you have a paper or a research product that you would like to share with the audience that you think represents the kind of work in this space that best kind of embodies the potential for impact and your passion, I'd like to invite you to share that reference in the chat. I'm sure that our audience would love to read more about the great work that you've done. So if you're comfortable doing that, I invite each of our panelists to put a link to something that that can help the audience know more how you did it.
Yeah, I have the ideal paper, but I'm waiting for permission from my collaborators to put it online. Is it okay if I follow up with the committee in a few days?
Of course. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Basically, it would be like a paper on designing better policies, like more efficient and more fair policies for matching people experiencing homelessness to resources. So there's very nice OR work, but then also like the actual application on homelessness and issues of assisting vulnerable populations that are affected by systemic biases and so on. And how can you do that?
Yes, thank you very much. And for Larry and Karen, I would like to invite you now or at a later point. If there's something that you've done in this space that you're particularly proud of, I would welcome the opportunity to share it with our audience here and who may watch the video later on.
Sure. I mean, since, as I said, I come at this much more from a teaching perspective than a research perspective, I don't have a paper to share. We are hoping to write a couple papers about teaching this material, but we haven't had a chance yet. But I'll post the link to our GitHub repo, which has a lot of the materials from our class, especially Python Jupyter notebooks that we've developed to introduce students to the idea of social coding with social justice in mind. So I'll post that link in the chat.
Yeah, thank you very much. With the few minutes we have left, I'd like to invite each of you, if you could say just a few last words. And while you're doing that, I'll put a link in the chat to the National Academies of Science report on advancing anti-racism, DEI, and inclusion in STEM organizations. So any of you are welcome to say just a few last words.
I can say a few words.
Yes, please.
First of all, I hope that this and other panels on research related to DEI can help attract more people to this kind of work, that I can help elevate the importance of doing work in this area, and that we can get more people excited, and hopefully over the next few years, us and others can work to make more outlets where this kind of work would be valued and appreciated, and make life easier for people who are early on the tenure clock.
Wonderful. Thank you, Phoebe. Karen, are there any last words you'd like to share?
I just want to thank everyone for coming, and also thank you for the invitation to be a part of this panel. I also want to mention that I participated probably, I think, last year or so around a conversation about how to be more inclusive in the mathematical sciences. And that kind of reminds me a little bit about this conversation today. And I think a large part of what we left that conversation with was being intentional about recruiting people into this space. And I know we're talking about how to get started, so it's kind of hard to think about how do you recruit people into this space if you're just trying to get started. But I think we probably can set our eyes on that to be a potential goal and a target, and just trying to figure out how to create spaces and opportunities for increasing the amount of people that we have within this space.
Thank you very much, Karen. Larry?
Yeah, I agree with everything that that Karen and Phoebe said, and I would just add that like this kind of space is great. One of the hardest things about getting started in a new project, especially one that's going to be collaborative and interdisciplinary, is you don't know really where to go to find the people who might want to work with you. And so the more kinds of events like this we can have, the better, I think. So thanks a lot for organizing it.
Thank you, Larry. Thanks to the panel for taking time to join us this afternoon. Granny and I are so appreciative to Karen Hicklin, Larry Snyder, and Phoebe Vianos for sharing their thoughts on building the field. We hope that some of what we discussed today can be useful for you in your research and practice, teaching, and service. If you have any comments, suggestions, or feedback about this event, you're welcome to share them with Granny and me afterwards, or the president of the Informs DEI Committee, Anahita, who introduced, or Gina Lloyd, who's the DEIC liaison to the Informs Office and Chief Human Resources Officer. And Granny and I would like to thank Mary Lazinski, Director of Marketing for Informs, for publicizing and hosting this event, and for Gina for serving as moderator and Chief Spotlight Officer for the webinar. Gina, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for taking the time. We hope to see you soon, maybe at Informs Phoenix in 2 weeks.